The Mahabharata is the jewel of the ancient world, and it's a refined jewel. Let's begin here at the very source of Indo European lore. Originally, the Vedas, the scriptures of the Hindu Antiquity, and the Avesta, which are the old Zoroastrian scriptures, came from the same source. This is the oldest layer of writings that we have from India or from Persia. They comprise hymns and sacrificial rites and wisdom literature. It's a common source of oral lore that came from the late Bronze Age or the early Iron Age. Burial mounds were discovered in Soviet Russia and not well known internationally until after the fall of Soviet Russia. Some of these mounds were looked at, discovered just east of the Ural Mountains, and that is way up north, east of the divide between Europe and Asia. The Ural Mountains are the barrier between Europe and Asia. And these graves, which are very old, show evidence of the exact burial rituals that are detailed in the Rig Veda, which is the oldest of the Vedas. The oldest layer of lore in Hindu literature is called what is heard, and this is referring to the old oral lore as opposed to the newer Hindu scriptures, which are only 3,000 years old or so, that are called what is written, and those are written later. The Vedas were written in North India sometime in the second millennium before Christ, pretty long ago. The Avestas were written down maybe 1,000 years later. At some point, this people migrated out of the Central Asian steppes during the beginnings of the warlike Bronze Age. They appeared as warriors in horse-drawn chariots. The chariot was the first war machine. It was engineered for speed. It required an incredible amount of skill to build and to manage a two-wheeled cart that had to be steadied by balance while trying to fight, throwing spears, launching arrows, holding at least a rein of one of the horses, sometimes held around the hips. It took a great deal of skill to manage. This chariot warfare with Bronze Age weapons essentially put an end to old Europe, the old culture I was describing earlier, the village life throughout the steppes and throughout old Europe, the peaceful way of village life that had existed for thousands of years. This period of old Europe is what we used to call the Stone Age, and there were still stone tools and implements used in this time, but we know now that Stone Age people were not the ignorant club wielders that we used to think of living in caves. Some probably still did live in caves, but that doesn't mean they weren't wise and had culture. The Indus Valley civilization is the early civilization in India along the Indus River in what is now Pakistan. This is one of the great Bronze Age early civilizations, among the first city builders, and they traded with the other city builders, Egypt, Mesopotamia, maybe even China. This culture died when the rivers dried up at their sources, or perhaps this was just part of what we now call the Bronze Age collapse, which was when all of the old cultures of Europe suddenly collapsed. This is what put an end to the Mycenaean culture that Homer sang about. And all other cultures around the Mediterranean came to a sudden and somewhat mysterious climatic end at that time. Well, this is about the time that these Indo-Aryan people invaded northern India along the Ganges and its tributaries and set up new kingdoms. The people of the Indus Valley civilization possibly migrated into India before and were pushed south by these new settlers. These new settlers, these Bronze Age warriors, set up kingdoms, and these are the kingdoms that the Mahabharata relates. And this was specifically the Kuru kingdom, descended from the forefather Bharata, who is whom the Mahabharata is named. It means the great Bharata. Traditionally, it's said that the Mahabharata was written by the sage Vyasa. He's also the one credited with writing all the Vedas. Now, this seems like a Herculean task to us, and who knows what this means in ancient times. But it is said that the Mahabharata contains the entire Veda, which is all encompassed within this vast story. And it is a vast poem. It is the longest poem in existence. It's written in couplets, and there are 100,000 of these couplets in the longest version. That's 200,000 lines of poetry. It is 8 times as long as the Iliad and the Odyssey put together. And many different versions have been preserved. It's a testament to its enduring popularity even today. And unfortunately, we can't study these couplets as written unless we master ancient Sanskrit. But Carol Satyamurthy has. She was a British award-winning poet and instructor, and she's given us a wonderful verse translation in good old iambic pentameter. And it's not difficult, it's easy and delightful to read, and bursting with the splendid imagery and liveliness of the original. So we'll be using her translation, and also we'll be looking through this illustrated Mahabharata as a guide. So the legendary sage Vyasa, who wrote the poem, also the reputed author of the Vedas, with insight into the divine wisdom of the cosmos that enables men and women with their dharma, which is the Indian word for the right path to the proper place in the balance of the universe. And he begins to think of a tale that will encompass all human and divine wisdom, humanity and the story of the gods and creation. And he thinks of it a long time. Vyasa, master of cosmic knowledge, composed this poem. It first took shape silently in his mind, a panorama spreading out before him. He himself was both author and actor in his story, as we are in our own lives, and besides, all is permitted to the storyteller. The poem was a map of the labyrinth, the moral maze that is our life on earth. It is told of choices and of mortal error, of how even the saintly go astray. Picture him, standing, bearded, rake thin, his eyes closed, his head and body smeared with ash and ochre, rags for a covering, a visionary, the entire epic cradled in his head. He approached Brahma, lord of creation, his inspiration all along, who happened to be paying him a visit. Vyasa spoke. Lord, I have composed a mighty poem. My work will open eyes dulled by ignorance, as the sun scatters darkness, as the moon's subtle beams illumine the lotus buds. All the wisdom of the world is in it. Lord Brahma praised the seer. You have done well. Your poem will awaken all who hear it, and it should be written. You have my blessing. Then he cast his mind over a number of candidates, all worthy scribes, and said, Ask Ganesha, the elephant-headed god, master of all things intellectual, god of beginnings. He it is who guards thresholds, the boundaries of time and space, who removes obstacles. Yes, ask Ganesha. He is best fitted for this gargantuan work. So Ganesha agrees, but he demands that Vyasa keep going. There will be no pauses in the telling. If there is, he'll get up and walk away. And Vyasa says, I could sing for many days, a whole lunar cycle and more. And so they begin, but Ganesha runs out of ink. So he breaks off his tusk and continues to write in his own blood. And this shows that even the gods are willing to sacrifice for the sake of this tale. It also illustrates the nature of oral recitation. If a oral trained singer stops, he loses the thread of the tale, and they're trained in this way. That it's the song itself that helps him to remember. So he's composed the poem, and at a sacrifice of a community of Brahmin seers, we are ready to hear it. And so the tale begins. And it begins with the stories of the forefathers of the Bharata lineage. And this refers to a very rich mythological background. The Kuru kingdom is one of the historical early kingdoms of northern India along the upper Ganges and its tributaries, where its waters spill down from the Himalaya mountains and give life to the dense forests. And of course, Ganges herself is a goddess and a foremother of the Bharata kings. Ganges, according to the mythology, began in heaven, and it came through a gate in heaven into the Himalayas, and then out of the Himalayas into the forest. And Ganges herself appeared as a beautiful maiden by the river, and taken to wife by one of the forefathers. And so this ordered society that's presented at the beginning of the poem is a period of peace long ago. It was a period that was presided over by the Brahmins, the priests, and just under them are the rulers, and the rulers must live by dharma and enforce it, and they rule over the merchant class and the artisan class. And this caste system was originally not one of conflict and exploitation. That was actually a violation of the dharma. But it was an ordered society that was in peace and all cared for each other. All lived in balance and all prospered. And in this age of peace, there was no need for enforcing dharma. Everyone lived as though the right way were self-evident under the guidance of the sages. But this would change. Unseen in the cosmos, gods and demons fought for supremacy. Demons, defeated, forced out by the gods, began to take birth in the human world as kshatriyas. Those are warrior kings. They thought they should be gods. They despised lawful ways and moderation. The beautiful resources of the world were theirs to plunder, squander, smash, defile. Ravaging the earth, they multiplied, sowing hate, mistrust, and fear, oppressing and slaughtering gentle creatures, so that life became a misery. Earth went to Brahma, the Lord of creation, and bowed down before him. O Lord Brahma, I am overwhelmed by so much wickedness. I shall be destroyed. She described to him what was taking place. Of course, omniscient Brahma knew already every corner of the created world. He assured her he would bring together the mighty powers of heaven to support her. Then Brahma summoned all the gods and spoke, "Earth is in danger. You must each be born as humans, using a portion of yourselves to endow a human being with godlike power. Employ your attributes as you see fit. Pitch your strength against the demonic forces which threaten to engulf the entire earth." The gods were eager to begin their mission, and they exhorted the Supreme Being, Vishnu himself, to take on human form. So it was that your splendid great-grandfather and his brothers, the 5 sons of Pandu, partial incarnations of deities, and Krishna Vasudeva, their supporter in all things, was the knowing avatar of the great Lord Vishnu, the all-powerful. Their cousins, sons of Pandu's sightless brother, the 100 Kauravas, were of demon stock. But all this is preceded in the poem by the ages of creation. It is a whole universe of spiritual beings in vast spiritual realms that were likened into continents in the far unseen cosmos, far, far greater than the material world. This was the Hindu universe. There were supreme gods and there were lesser gods. There was one who ruled over all. Among the lesser gods, there were good gods, and there were what we would probably call evil gods that were power-hungry, devouring demons. And the lesser gods were no longer immortal. They had been once. There was a time, long ago, in the paradise of heaven, the Lord Indra, who was the lord of all the lesser gods, and he was riding through the heavens on his elephant. And he was given a garland of flowers by the sage Durvasa. But these flowers attracted bees, and the elephant in alarm threw down the garland. And this angered the sage, because the garland had a blessing of a divine offering in it. He had been wandering through the forest in an ecstasy of contemplation when he gave up this garland. However, this was Durvasa, and he was a short-tempered, legendary rishi. That word rishi means the sage, and known for his irascible nature. And so he cursed Indra and all the lesser gods by taking away their glory. Their glory would be cast down as the garland was cast down. And so they lost immortality. And they were not going to be able to win it back unless they could drink of the nectar of immortality. And this was the Amrita. And this is a word, Amrita, that's related to ambrosia in the Greeks, which was the drink of the Hellenic gods on Mount Olympus. And it was what gave immortality. But first they had to find the Amrita. And so all the gods, the good gods and the evil gods, got together, and they took the universal mountain, the axis of the universe that links all the realms of the great cosmos together, and around this mountain they wrapped the universal serpent, and they began to pull him back and forth using the mountain as a churn, and so they churned the ocean of milk. And this was the universal ocean of the spirit. And so they pulled back and forth, churning this universal ocean for a cosmic age or two. And as it was churning, the ocean curdled up several precious jewels, which were powers and virtues and wonderful jewels and goddesses and a poison, and finally, after a long time, a jar of Amrita. Also, this ocean of milk, by the poison that came out of it, poisoned the whole ocean and turned it into salt, and that's why we have a salt ocean and not an ocean of milk. But finally they had enough Amrita to fill a jar, and it was not enough to go around. And so there was war among the gods, and the demons, the Rakshasas, stole it. And so the devas, the good gods, went to Vishnu to get it back. And he did, and he gave it to the devas, and the Rakshasas were cast out of heaven. So they came down into the earth, and they began to incarnate as warrior kings. They're the ones who began this war. And the earth had to be cleansed, and so it was. And then there was an age of peace again. So these cycles of war and peace repeat throughout the cosmic history, and it came to be once again in the time of the Kuru kingdom that this curse was going to come once again, the conflict between the good and the evil. So here in this part of the conflict, we have the main story of the Mahabharata, which is the rivalry between two branches of the Kuru princes. They're sons of two brothers, Drishtarashta and Pandu. The 100 Kauravas, that word simply means descendants of Kuru, the 100 Kauravas are the sons of the blind prince Drishtaharashtra. They're also sons of the righteous mother Gandhari. The oldest of the Kauravas, the prince of them all, is Duryodhana, who's rash, belligerent, and disobedient. And all of his brothers are like this because they're influenced by the Rakshasas, the demons. On the other side are the 5 Pandavas, sons of the brother of the 2 Pandu. And of these 5, Yudhishthira is the eldest. He's the prince of that line. Arjuna is the hero. He's the great warrior and the friend of Krishna throughout the poem. There's also Bhima, the strongest man on the earth, and a pair of twins. And a little legendary background, the maternal line of all of these cousins includes the goddess Ganga of the Ganges. She was the grandmother of the 2 brothers Drishtaharashtra and Pandu. And they had another grandmother too, who was none other than Satyavati, who was the mother of the sage Vyasa. And she also was a river goddess in origin. And in the story, she was a fisherwoman, a ferryman on the river Yamuna. This is the chief tributary of the Ganges, every bit as big a river as the Ganges. And then they come together and become an even greater river. So all of these princes were brought up together in the palace, but there were often arguments, and some threatened violence. So the kingdom was divided, and the 5 Pandavas were sent to build a palace of their own. And they were sent into a forbidden wilderness and swamp and told that that could be their kingdom. So they had to clear the land, and they did. And they had the palace built by the architect of the gods. And this is Maya, the god of illusions. And I'm going to read here from William Buck's 1973 prose translation, a description of this palace that they built. Maya began to build his palace, keeping it hidden and invisible until he had finished. Upon 1,000 columns of gold, he built a magic building of white marble set with pearls. He worked day and night by sunlight and moonlight and the dancing rays of pearls and jewels. He covered the open windows with networks of gold. He set lamps of softly shining gems in the rooms and hallways and arcades, gems that flowed after once he touched them. By the front door, Maya put a tree of lights. Its leaves were cut from thin sheets of emerald and beryl with veins of gold. Its tall trunk and long branches were encrusted with every known jewel, and from it came the fragrance of high mountain forests. It rang musically in the wind. It flashed and gleamed bright in the sun, as though its broad leaves had just been wet. Scarlet and pink flowers of coral opened and closed with the day and night. Then Maya carried full-grown trees and made parks in the courtyards and brought songbirds and put them in the trees. He made ponds and pools of water and filled them with fish and flowers. Maya stood by the main door and removed his spell of illusion, and he called the Pandavas and Krishna to see what he had done. "It is so beautiful," said Arjuna, "that it hardly seems real. It is not an illusion, Maya?" Maya said, "I don't know. I was very tired. I worked like a demon building this, but now my aches and pains are gone like a cloud disappearing from across the face of the moon. Now, if the palace vanished also, what could I say?" "Now take care," said Krishna. "Maya mixes his blessings. Let me lead the way." The Pandavas followed Krishna up the stairs. "Is it dangerous?" asked Arjuna. Krishna replied over his shoulder, "Not exactly, but..." With a crash, Krishna walked straight into a closed door of clear crystal and stood back, rubbing a bruise on his head. See, that's the sort of thing not to do. Krishna was pushing at the door. Then he gave up and went to a smaller doorway next to it. He stepped up, pushed, and fell right through. Krishna lay on the beautiful floor. Well, come on in. There is no door here, just empty air. This is among the finest poetry of the epic, this description of the palace, an example of its splendid imagery. And this was Indraprashta, the palace of the Pandavas, and it's believed to have been the foundation of Delhi. And I bring this up that this was the palace of the five Pandavas built by Maya, the god of illusions, because this emphasizes a key point in Vedic philosophy that it's important to understand. And that is that the Vedic understanding of human life and the cosmos, and this is true of all the Indic religions, Hinduism, Jain, Buddhist, all with their dizzying complexity of different approaches, interpretations, and cults. But for them all, the material world is an illusion. Even though there's a highly structured and ordered universe, the whole thing partakes of the nature of illusion. Even the great cycles of ordered time, each ruled over by a prospective God, who may incarnate at different times. So there's this sense of dharma and this sense of righteousness and duty contributing to a universal balance, but there's also this sense of illusion that hangs over everything. And reincarnation implies that even personal identity, the life of the person, is an illusion. So this is the palace of the Pandavas. And the problem that we come to is that when the five Pandavas invited their 100 Kaurava cousins to come and see it, and they came to see Yudhishthira's coronation in his new palace, in his half of the kingdom, Duryodhana, the prince of the 100 Kauravas, was intensely jealous. And while wandering through the palace, he stepped down into a pool that was so still he did not realize it held water. And when he slipped into the water, he was surprised and he slipped off and fell into the pool. And when he did, Draupadi, the wife of the Pandavas, laughed at him and called him the blind son of the blind. Well, Duryodhana was infuriated and he challenged Yudhishthira to a tournament of dice at Hastinapura, the Kuru palace. Challenges of dice game were considered a test of honor at this time. A king could not really refuse, but it was well known that Yudhishthira, the prince of the five Pandavas, was not skilled at the game. Many neighboring kings came to watch the match. Duryodhana won every game, and these were bets. At first, they were just small items, but the stakes kept getting larger. Yudhishthira would not give up. He gambled away everything and kept thinking he could win it all back in one more game. Finally, he gambled away his brothers, and then he gambled away himself. And finally, the unthinkable, he offered his wife Draupadi, and he lost her too. Well, then Duryodhana demanded that the Pandavas strip off their robes so that they could see what kind of slaves they had just purchased. And they demanded that Draupadi strip off her clothes too, like a newly acquired slave. And he took her up and he touched her and he started to undress her in front of everyone. He grabbed her sari and started to unwrap it from her. She prayed, and the skies darkened, and magically, as the sari unwound, another appeared beneath it, and then another and another, so that it was like a rainbow of fine silk cloth that was being unraveled, and yet there was always another underneath it. So she could not be disrobed. But this outrage could not be forgiven. Even Duryodhana's parents and the counselors and all the watching kings agreed this was an outrage. And finally, one more bet. He would restore the freedom of the five brothers and their wife, but challenge them to one more game, and the stakes would be a 13-year exile away from the kingdom. Yudhishthira lost again, and so the Pandavas disappeared into the forest for 13 years. And this was a time of adventure and discovery, learning from sages, growing in character. But war was now inevitable because of the outrage to Draupadi. During this time, the hero of Arjuna, and he does this both before the war and after the war, he climbs into the Himalayas to speak with Vishnu and to get guidance from him. And in the war, his chariot is actually driven by Krishna, who is an incarnation of Vishnu. And so now the battle is inevitable, and even after 13 years, it's going to happen. And so it does. And so the armies gather on the plain outside the city. Just as the war is getting ready to begin, Arjuna realizes he does not want to fight his own cousins. He does not want this war and all its death, and he expresses this to his charioteer, Krishna. I can't do this. These are my brothers, my cousins, my friends. Why does this need to happen? And until this moment, he still doesn't realize that his chariot driver, his friend Krishna, is the universal God himself, Krishna, the avatar of Vishnu. And so right then, time stops. All the elephants, the men, the horses, everyone poised to shoot off their arrows, everyone freezes in time, while Krishna explains to Arjuna the reason that righteousness demands this struggle, because it's a struggle for good. And this is the marvelous Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God. And he says that Arjuna has to fulfill his dharma as a warrior defending the right. And it's interesting that Krishna has already complained himself about this war because he tried to stop it. And he was not able to keep men from their folly. One of the opponents of Arjuna in this war is Bhishma, the righteous warrior. He was the one who taught all of the brothers, both cousins, both sides, the laws of Dharma, and was responsible for their education in warfare. He is so righteous that he will not abandon Duryodhana, even though he knows he's not in the right, but he knows that it's his duty to defend him. And so he's on the opposite side. So right before the battle begins, Arjuna climbs off of his chariot. He goes up to Bhishma. He bows down before him on the ground, touches his feet, and asks him for his blessing. And Bhishma is so righteous that he grants his blessing to his enemy. And Bhishma is so righteous, it's been ordained that he cannot die until the hour of his choosing. Well, in the battle, he's penetrated by so many hundreds of arrows that there's not even room in his flesh for another. And he lays suspended on his bed of arrows for 51 days while the battle pauses, and the gods grant freedom from pain for him. And during this time, laying on his bed of arrows, he teaches the Dharma while all the warriors listen. He gives advice on the future of the kingdom and on all things. There's no point in this whole story that's without interest as long as it is. So the battle commences. It's a great slaughter. And after the battle, there's a time of tremendous mourning because so many warriors have been lost. And those few who survive, at the very end, they wander off into the forest and become hermits. Then, a few generations after, we're hearing the tale sung at the sacrifice presided over by one of the descendants of the Kuru kingdom. There is so much that is truly noble in this magnificent monument of the ancient lore. And at the very center of it is this tremendous theophany that is the unveiling of Krishna's divine nature. It's preceded by ascetic philosophy in Krishna's own words, the Vedic teachings that if one acts according to righteousness, but without attachment to the results of one's actions, this is the way of liberation that effectively frees the mind from passions. In the Vedic language, this is attachment. The Philocalic fathers would call it passionate attachment. And it is then, and only then, and after revealing a few other of the Vedic teachings, that Krishna reveals his true nature. Right at the commencement of the war, right in the middle of the whole poem, as though in the center of a mandala diagram, the kind that Vedic religions use for meditation practice, for searching for the center of being within, where God is to be encountered. The Vedic philosophy is often looked to as an example for universal metaphysical doctrines, such as are represented in all ancient religions and philosophies. We should keep in mind that this is an interpretation, but it is the interpretation of the perennialist view that Rene Guénon taught, and also Amanda Coomaraswamy. These are the ideas that so impressed Father Seraphim Rose before he encountered the Orthodox tradition. However, if one attempts to fit Christianity into this same philosophical framework, it doesn't work. Christianity has too many unique features, and these have to be gutted to fit into a pre-Christian framework. There's a different view of creation, a different view of the world and of humanity. These are not illusion, but exist to become sanctified, perfected, brought into divine union with God, not so as to disappear into the absolute, but to be uniquely revealed in an unforeseen manner. It is a different God. It's a uniquely and intensely personal God, as revealed in the God-man, absolutely and fully God, and absolutely fully man of our created nature at the same time. His incarnation brought these new revelations and a recreation of humanity. These are new revelations unique to the Judeo-Christian worldview. And if you strip these away to force Christianity into a perennialist view, what you get is Gnostic Christianity, which is not really Christianity. Those who admire perennialist thought love Gnostic Christianity and prefer it, not realizing what one loses is precisely what all the pre-Christian religions thirsted for the most: direct access to the Godhead, union with God as we see in the writings of Saint Sophrony of Essex, the recreation of humanity in the uncreated energies of God. This innate yearning of the human spirit is what we see in the best examples of the ancient lore in an incomplete way. As Nikolai Varamilovich pointed out in his speeches to the English people that we quoted earlier, and in his descriptions of the universal man who is Christ, but at times, because of St. Nikolai's familiarity with the Indian philosophy, he portrayed somewhat as a wandering Oriental seeker looking to instruct anyone who would listen to his universal wisdom. And so I'm tempted to think that St. Nikolai used Vyasa as a model. for his universal man. It's actually very clear when you look at it closely. Vyasa, the sage, the author of the Mahabharata, is somewhat of a Christ figure. His mother was so virtuous she was assured she would remain a virgin after Vyasa's birth. And even though this fairy woman was a smelly fisherwoman, Vyasa's birth rendered her sweet smelling. Spears and arrows sharpened, armor burnished until it dazzled like the sun itself. Elephants fretted, straining at their tethers, swinging their great heads from side to side. Horses rolled their eyes, their nostrils flaring and longing for the freedom of the gallop. Brahmins performing Bhishma's consecrations, bloody rain fell, and disembodied voices were heard. Jackals howled ferociously, and meteors streaked across the glowering sky. As morning broke on the opening day of war, the rising sun was streaking the sky with scarlet. The opposing armies, division upon division, stretched away as far as the eye followed the curving earth. So much armor on men, elephants, horses. The brilliant gold and bronze rivaled the sun. The mass of men and beasts constantly moving was beautiful as a river thick with fish. Glittering thousands upon thousands, all confident in pre-arranged formations. Both forces were terrible, both beautiful, and both men's hearts were filled with joy and pride at being part of it, this grand display, this glorious event, this sacrifice. This, the well-trained warrior's highest calling. Fear, suffering, and grief would follow later. To see this greatest war ever fought on earth, there had gathered from all the three worlds crowds of spectators, ordinary people, holy men, divine beings, all assembled to witness the spectacular clash of kin. On rising ground that overlooked the plain, or hovering in the sparkling air above, they waited, jostling for the best positions. With the two sides facing one another, one east, one west, with 10,000 conches blaring out in challenge, the din of cymbals and deep heart-stopping throb of war drums. Arjuna said to Krishna, his charioteer, "Drive the chariot out into no man's land, so I can see, before the battle starts, the faces of the enemy I must kill." There, in the moment, before hell's unleashing, with each blade whetted, each weapon at hand. There, in the moment when the frenzy of preparation was over, and the din of death not yet begun. There, at that point, in the relentless passage of events, time freezes.